What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you a recap of week number 13 of the 2024 college football season. What an exciting weekend of college football it was in week number 13 of this 2024 season. I tell you what, there were so many upsets, there were so many games where there were definitely trap games. That's really what this weekend was about. You had the week 13, you had some kind of a trap weekend right before a rivalry weekend, and obviously I think that was a big disadvantage for a lot of these teams here that got upsetted over the weekend. We'll talk about mainly, of course, all the upsets here as we go through these 5 biggest recaps. Going to give you my 5 biggest recaps here from what was an exciting weekend of college football here in week number 13. Again, a lot of great games, some close games, and so many upsets did play out here in week 13. And that's what November's been like, here throughout the month. This is a really exciting month in November. Probably the most exciting November I think we've had in a very long time in the history of college football. So let's go ahead and get started here with these 5 biggest recaps. And we will start here with number 5, and that's Miami and SMU could both make the playoffs. So, it was a kind of a quiet weekend in the ACC. Really nothing too serious happened in this conference. Clemson, they took on a pretty easy opponent. They're finished with conference play. They got South Carolina coming up this weekend and rivalry weekend. Mainly the 2 games that we focused on in the ACC were Miami and SMU. You look at Miami, they did bounce back after the loss to Georgia Tech, from a couple weeks ago. They get a huge win here over Wake Forest, 42-14. It looked like Wake Forest was going to pull off the upset, but, Miami did pull away in that fourth quarter. That's kind of been the, story with Miami throughout the season. It seems like they get off to really slow starts. First half, Wake Forest was right there with them throughout the third quarter. And I don't know what happened there in the fourth quarter for the Demon Deacons. I think Wake Forest may have just ran out of gas. But, Miami, this is a team that, in the second half, they just usually dominate their opponents. They didn't do that against Georgia Tech from a couple weeks ago, but they did it right here against Wake Forest. So Miami, all they need to do is just beat Syracuse to get to the conference championship, and they will definitely make it into the college football playoff, in my opinion, even if they lose the conference championship. Now, SMU on the other side, they beat Virginia pretty easily, 33-7. SMU definitely the more talented team in the ACC and definitely the most dangerous team in this conference. SMU, I think, is going to get to the ACC championship regardless if they lose this upcoming weekend, but I think SMU, is the most talented team in this conference. I don't really see them losing this upcoming weekend unless something big were to happen. Let's say SMU loses this game and maybe Clemson gets in there. Maybe SMU probably gets knocked out of the ACC championship. I don't really think that, I don't really think you can penalize SMU for that, but we'll just have to wait and see. But, Miami and SMU both could make the playoff. And how I think this is going to work, let's say Miami and SMU both are in the conference championship. Either team loses, let's say Miami or SMU, they both lose and everything. One team does win. They get that probably top 4 spot in the conference championship. Actually the top 4 teams from the Power 4 level. And then you got, a team that probably could finish as a runner-up, and they could probably make it into the college football playoff as an at-large team. So, with Miami and SMU, with them, on a winning streak, and then also the chaos that we had over the weekend, we could see 2 ACC teams in the playoff. We're not going to see 2 teams in the Big 12 make the playoff because all the Big 12 teams now have 3 losses. So, I think there's like one team that's got 2 losses. They could still make it in probably, but there's a lot of teams out there. Actually, there's like 3. There's like a lot of teams in the Big 12 with 3 losses. So maybe we don't get a couple of Big 12 teams in the college football playoff. We could see 2 ACC teams make the playoff. That's just how I think it's going to happen. So Miami and SMU both could make the playoff. Again, Miami and SMU got pretty big wins over the weekend. Miami defeated Wake Forest 42-14. And then SMU defeated Virginia on the road 33-7, so took care of business really easily. Let's now move on to number 4. Number 4 biggest recap, Indiana and Army are not playoff contenders. So this is not really about Ohio State. This is not really about Notre Dame. I know I got Ohio State here in the picture, but Indiana and Army, we're pretty much here to talk about them mostly. First off, let's start with the Army and Notre Dame game. Of course, that game was not even close whatsoever. 49-14 win for the Fighting Irish. And we knew that Army was not really on the level of Notre Dame. Let's be honest, this kind of looked like the same outcome in the Navy game. Army and Navy are two teams that run the triple option very often throughout college football. And like I said, when it comes to Notre Dame, it seems like they really prepare really well for that triple option. And they've already taken on a triple option team in an offense already this year. And that was Navy back in the month of October. So yeah, Army just did not really play well in this game. The offense just really could not get past this Notre Dame defense. And Notre Dame's offense looks very explosive. It looks so much better compared to the first half of the year. Notre Dame, I think, is going to win out. They're going to get in the college football playoff as a 11-1 at-large team. They won't be really ranked high enough, just outside, the top 4, but they'll probably be in there somewhere, maybe at 9 or maybe 10 as a seed, but maybe also number 8 due it with all the chaos that we had over the weekend. So yeah, Army is not a playoff contender. I know they were undefeated, but they weren't really playing anybody that tough on their schedule. When they got into this game against Notre Dame, you could tell they were not ready to go in this one. And then Indiana on the other side. Look, I know Indiana's been a really good team this year, but you look at Indiana and Army, they played like similar schedules. Indiana hasn't really played anybody tough on their schedule except for this game against Ohio State. Indiana had a pretty good start. They had the first touchdown of the game, and then when Ohio State scored, it was all over from there. Ohio State's defense, the pass rush really got to, Indiana's quarterback and Wark. They pressured him throughout this game. The running backs for Ohio State made some big plays. And I was really impressed with Will Howard's performance. Probably the best performance that he's had all year long. And yeah, this Ohio State team, I'm telling you, they look really dangerous going the rest of the way forward. They got Michigan coming up on Saturday, the game. Really excited for that game, even though Michigan's not been really good this year. But, it's obviously a game that probably decides if Ohio State does get to the Big Ten championship. So, yeah, Indiana, this was a very tough loss for them. I don't think Indiana's going to be in the playoff field because they actually weren't really that competitive. Army and Indiana really needed to be competitive in both of their games against two very talented teams in order to kind of, secure a college football playoff spot. Indiana, though, did not really do that well against, Ohio State. I know the scoreboard maybe doesn't look like they got blown out, but they really did. So they probably needed to lose this game by 7, maybe 3 points, but they ended up losing by double digits. So I don't think the committee is going to give them credit for this game against Ohio State. So yeah, Indiana's first loss of the season, and then Army, same thing as well. Both of these teams are not playoff contenders in my opinion. And look, I'm not disrespecting Indiana and Army. They're both really good teams, but when it comes to really tough competition against like a very talented team, they're clearly not on the level of both of these teams just yet. So Indiana and Army are not playoff contenders. That's my number 4 biggest recap. Let's now move on to number 3. 3 SEC teams took a huge fall this week. So how about the SEC? SEC just continues and continues to be a really wild conference this year. A lot of these teams continue to beat up on each other. We saw 3 SEC teams ranked in the top 25 go down this week. First off, you have Florida upsetting Ole Miss 17-14. Jackson Dart did not play well in that game. Ole Miss's playoff hopes are over. They're not going to make the college football playoff. Then you got Alabama. What happened to Alabama last night against Oklahoma? Alabama was a double-digit favorite on the road at Oklahoma. You got Oklahoma's offense that hasn't been really good all year long, and they really showed up in this game. And their defense also showed up in this one. They shut down Jalen Milroe's running game. They shut down these receivers of Alabama. Yeah, I don't know what happened to the Crimson Tide last night, so I don't think Alabama's going to make the playoff either. They haven't lost to Tennessee already, so that's not going to put them in the college football playoff. And again, with 9-3 record, maybe to finish things out, they're probably not going to make it in. And then Texas A&M and Auburn, what a game last night between these two teams. Going into 4 overtimes. This has to be the game of the year in my opinion. Both of these teams going back and forth. Auburn started out pretty strong in this game. They got off to a 21-0 start, and then Texas A&M comes back from 21 down. It looked like Texas A&M was going to win this game and probably pull away, but Auburn just kept fighting back and forth. And yeah, this was a great game. Probably the game of the year in the SEC, in my opinion. Again, both teams looked pretty even, and really two talented teams as well. Again, Auburn, really, it looked like they were going to lose this game because we've seen Auburn lose, like, some games, like in close games, like, with, like, making some big mistakes down the end and everything. But that obviously did not happen. Hugh Freeze gets a huge win here against Texas A&M. Now Auburn's got Alabama coming up this weekend on the road in the Iron Bowl. That's going to be a really good game. I'm really looking forward to that game. And then you got Texas A&M against Texas coming up. There are so many great games coming up in the SEC and rivalry weekend. But yeah, you got now a huge tie in the SEC. You got Texas that took care of business against Kentucky, so they're probably the front runners right now. And then you got like a big tie for second place. But Georgia is actually that second place team because they already beat Tennessee. But let's say if Texas loses to Texas A&M, is that going to be a rematch between Tennessee and Georgia in the SEC title game? I really don't know. But when it comes to rivalry weekend, there's going to be a lot of chaos, and I think we might see that this weekend. I think Texas A&M, was not overlooking Auburn, but, they just came up just short in this game. They had a pass there that was dropped in the end zone, so 3 SEC teams took a huge fall this week. That is what my number 3 biggest recap says. Again, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M, these are teams that, had a chance to make the college football playoff, and they all go down this week. So I don't think a 3-loss team is going to make it into the SEC championship, and this goes back to the ACC. With all these 3 teams losing in the SEC, I don't think anybody is going to make it in as a 3-loss team for the SEC, and that's why I said we could have a couple of ACC teams make it in here to the college football playoff. So that is my number 3 biggest recap. 3 SEC teams took a huge fall this week. Let's now move on to number 2. There is now a 4-way tie in the Big 12. So just mention the SEC. There is now a 4-way tie in the conference of the Big 12. You look at the Big 12 this weekend, it was another really wild weekend in the Big 12. Obviously, the big upset was Kansas upsetting Colorado. That was an upset that I thought was going to play out, and it's exactly what happened. Kansas pulling off a win 37-21 over Colorado, and Kansas ran the football down this Colorado defense and everything. That was probably the game plan here for the Jayhawks, run the football all over this Colorado defensive line. And if you look at Colorado's defense, they were actually really good at stopping the run all year long. And Kansas, had like over 300 yards rushing, if I'm not mistaken. Jalen Daniels also ran the football with his legs as well. I mean, this was definitely a Kansas team that just came out really explosive on offense. And they just came out of nowhere and just dominated Colorado. So this was definitely a huge loss here for Colorado. You got a 4-way tie now. You got 4 teams all with identical 6-2 records in the Big 12. First off, you got BYU now with 2 losses. They lost to Arizona State. That was a great game as well against Arizona State and BYU. That was kind of a crazy finish as well. The crowd, was on the field. They had to, put 1 second back on the clock. BYU still had a chance to win this game, but Hail Mary does come up short. They even caught it in the, before the end zone, but it wasn't enough, so BYU does come up with another loss. So I don't think, maybe BYU doesn't make it to the Big 12 championship in my opinion, but there is a 4-way tie now in the Big 12. You got Iowa State, Arizona State, you got BYU and Colorado all tied for first place. I think if Arizona State and also, Iowa State, if they got their wins over the weekend, I think those 2 teams are probably, the 2 teams that will make it to the Big 12 championship. Let's say if Iowa State loses, to Kansas State this weekend, then I think there's going to be a lot of chaos in the Big 12. This is a conference that just continues to beat up on each other. These are teams that are continuing to beat up on each other, and there's just now a 4-way tie in the Big 12. The SEC and the Big 12 are crazy conferences this year. I would say the Big Ten and the ACC are pretty much, some quiet conferences. The ACC, there's still a ton of chaos there in that conference. But, Miami and SMU just need to win their final games, and they'll make it in there. So we know the ACC probably was quiet and everything. If SMU and Miami both win their final games, we knew the ACC was going to be really quiet the rest of the way. But, the Big 12 and the SEC are just continuing to be more and more chaotic. Again, 3 top 25 SEC teams go down this week. They're now out of the playoff, and then you got the Big 12 here. We did say a couple of teams probably won't make it into the college football playoff out of the Big 12. We could probably just see one team, and that team probably could be Arizona State. They got 2 losses. Colorado is probably not out of it just yet. They probably need to, just get a win over Oklahoma State in order to still make it to the Big 12 championship. But yeah, there is now a 4-way tie in the Big 12. Again, you got Iowa State up there. You got Arizona State, Colorado, and BYU. This is a really fun conference to watch, and so is the SEC. So that is my number 2 recap here. There is now a 4-way tie in the Big 12. And then number 1, trap games can ruin playoff hopes. That is what the weekend was all about here in week number 13. We saw a lot of trap games that turn into upsets, and they can ruin playoff hopes. Again, you had Florida and Ole Miss. That was definitely a trap game here for Ole Miss because they had to play on the road at the Swamp. And how about Florida? Coming, with a tough schedule this year. A lot of people doubted them. I knew Florida was definitely underrated. I had this team finishing like 7-5, and that seems like where they're going to, go to and everything. They got Florida State to close things out. What a really good season for Florida. They get to a bowl game in Billy Napier's like 3rd year, so a really good season for Billy Napier. I mean, he was on the hot seat probably going into his, 3rd year and everything, but it's really working out for him. So Florida gets a huge win over Ole Miss. Jackson Dart just made a lot of mistakes in this game. And also, 4th downs was definitely, a big factor for Ole Miss. They could not really, convert on those 4th downs. So that was definitely a trap game. DJ Lagway getting back at quarterback really has helped this Florida team out. And then you look at the other trap games that really ruined playoff hopes. Alabama at Oklahoma. Didn't really see an upset there happening. And then you had Texas A&M at Auburn. I kind of knew an upset probably would play out in that game, but it was still an exciting game. 4 overtime game, and then you had all these trap games in the Big 12. Colorado loses to Kansas on the road. Yeah, it was all about trap games, and they can ruin playoff hopes. And if we did not have, a Week 13 right before a rivalry weekend, this would definitely be a lot different. But trap games can definitely ruin playoff hopes. That is what we kind of saw here in week number 13. And again, a lot of, teams just really got upsetted over the weekend due to those trap games, and definitely, they ruined their playoff hopes. So it is definitely going to be wild to see what the college football playoff rankings will look like on Tuesday. They do come out on 8 o'clock Eastern time, so a pretty late night for the college football playoff rankings. But we are now heading into the final weekend of this 2024 college football season. It's been a really good season, and it's been a really good regular season. And we are so close to the postseason. We are getting close to the 12-team playoff as well. But that is my recap of week number 13 of this 2024 college football season. Let me guys know what you think about week 13. Was it an exciting weekend, or was it just another, typical Saturday of college football? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.